Welcome to the Plymouth Oracy Project pre-recorded session. What we're going to try and do this afternoon is to guide and support you on your journey to implement and sustain Oracy practices in your school. So today you'll receive some input from myself. I'm Deputy Director at PTSA, for those of you who don't know me, and I've been leading the Plymouth Oracy Project since it started in September 2017. Ruth Woodhouse, who's hopefully given you a wave now, who's the Director of PTSA, Secondary Teacher and Teaching and Learning Lead for Westmat, and then Rachel Davidson, who's the English and Oracy Lead and Teacher at Torbridge High. And Torbridge High were an original Plymouth Oracy Project school and started their work with us in 2017. So Ruth's going to start us off with a reminder of the implementation guide. This is key for Oracy, as Oracy really is a long-term development. I'll say that a few times throughout the webinar today, but I can't stress it enough. We know that Oracy can see gains in attainment, attendance, behaviour and well-being, and close the gap for those disadvantaged pupils, but it needs to be really carefully planned. It needs to be consistent, a conscious plan and sustained in planning, delivery and monitoring throughout the school.
Okay, thanks Donna. Hi everyone. Thank you for I was going to say being here, but thank you for listening in your own time. As Donna has just mentioned, we're going to just take a brief moment just to highlight really where this work sits in relation to the EEF's guide to good implementation, which I know you have explored before with John, and we're going to be looking at some tools for self-evaluation later on in the presentation, which really kind of fit into the explore and prepare stages of good implementation, in that it's going to help you identify that tight area of focus, identify your priorities that are amenable to change, and just really help you then put together an implementation plan that's going to have real focus and an increased chance of success, because you've invested that time identifying what you want to improve and where you currently are in your school with regards to Oracy, which obviously is really important before you start deciding what potential interventions or strategies to apply and to implement. So we're going to be talking through different ways that Oracy will no doubt already be part of your teaching and learning approach and pedagogy within your schools already, but we're just going to sort of share some ways PTSA and the Oracy project can support you on your journey with just making, like Donna says, it more explicit, making it a sort of a more central focus of the work that you already do.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ruth. So let's start with a brief overview of what Oracy is for us at the Plymouth Oracy Project, because that's a really important place to know where we are coming from and what we define Oracy as. And it builds on all of the success we've had with our partner schools since 2017. So for us, there are really two key elements to Oracy. There's the learning through talk, and this is the pedagogy that sits at the heart of your teaching and learning. It's your classroom environment, your approach to talk and Oracy in the classroom, the opportunities you provide for your pupils to practice Oracy, which includes exploratory talk, high quality discussion and the dialogic approaches. And then sitting next to that for us is learning to talk, which is those specific opportunities, and it's really explicit learning that we build into the curriculum to teach the children the skills of Oracy, both talk but also listening as well. It's really important, because how can we expect our pupils to develop effective Oracy skills if we don't teach them? Oracy is definitely something that needs to be taught rather than caught. We can't just assume because our children we perceive know how to talk or come into our classrooms talking that they know what effective talk is. And the key for us at the Plymouth Oracy Project is that you need both to be developed and evidenced in a school to have that high level of success with Oracy. So thinking about another key document or framework that really underpins what we do, you'll see on your screen now, is the Oracy Cambridge and Voice 21 framework, which has been developed as part of an EEF study. I really hope it's something that you're familiar with and that you've seen before, because this is a really core framework that underpins all of the Plymouth Oracy project work. It's something that in time, because it does take time, staff and pupils should know really well, and is a good basis for supporting learning to talk and also learning through talk as well. And what we know from metacognition research is that we need to be really explicit on what and why we're learning something. And it's exactly the same for Oracy. It's the same as if you were entering a science lesson or a maths lesson. The children should be really familiar with what Oracy skills they're developing and why they're developing their skills. So a starter question for you to ask yourself and to start asking your school staff is, does this framework currently influence our planning, our curriculum design, learning tasks that we set, homework that you send home for the pupils within your school? Because in those schools where it is inherent in the pedagogy and curriculum, it absolutely does. So let's briefly just unpick those 4 strands for those of you who maybe have seen it but haven't worked extensively with it, or haven't seen it at all, because that might be some of you. It's really broken down into 4 different strands of Oracy. So we've got physical, linguistic, cognitive, and we've got social and emotional Oracy. And just to look at some of those strands in more detail, this is something that you can obviously download from the PowerPoint and is freely available on the internet as well. But take the time to download it and read the different strands and what's expected within those strands. But just a few key things to pick out from experience that I've had from working from schools. So firstly, the linguistic strand. You can see that vocabulary is within that strand. Vocabulary is often a key focus in school. Vocabulary is important, but it's also important to say it's just one aspect of a good Oracy education. And what's also important to say is those who focus on vocabulary maybe need to be aware explicitly of those tiers of vocabulary and what's important, because often we find schools focus on tier 3, so that's subject specific vocabulary only, rather than starting to unpick the tier 2 vocabulary as well, which has a far higher utility and impact across pupils' learning in the whole curriculum and beyond. And for this session, we don't need to get too hung up on what words are tier 2 or are tier 3, but it's important that you're skilled in selecting the words that have those highest utility, not just within the subject you're teaching, but that are going to be able to be used across the whole school life and curriculum. Other areas to point out, thinking about cognitive and social and emotional, from the work we've done and confidence surveys we've done in the past, this is where we find staff and pupil confidence are lowest. And therefore, when you're starting to introduce aspects of Oracy or the Oracy framework into school, this might need to be more of a focus. And specifically within that cognitive element, thinking about areas like building on others' points of views and it being okay to disagree. We know these are really important skills, and they don't only affect attainment, but they affect behaviour and how pupils interact with each other. But these take focused teaching time, and they also take focused modelling as well from us as teachers joining in with those conversations. And actually, really importantly, within that social and emotional strand, you've got listening and responding. And we know within education and actually within life, listening is the most important skill that we need to learn, but it's often taught the least. And just because a pupil is quiet or looking at you, it doesn't mean they're listening in the way that they should be to be learning. Okay. So the next slide is just a model that we use in the professional development programs that we've developed within the Plymouth Oracy project. And I just thought it was really important to share with you here, because for us and for anybody who's doing Oracy well, Oracy is not just English, it's whole school. It's a whole school approach that needs to be integrated into everything. And I hope this model really demonstrates that. We've got clear intent, implementation and impact within the school approaches that we use and how we develop things to ensure that this is the case. But key words for us within that Oracy project are systematic, or in Ofsted terms, systemic is a word they like to use. It's sustainable, but more than that, it's a core expectation across everything that you do. A conversation with a pupil in the corridor is as important as the Oracy that you're demonstrating in lessons, because it's about the ethos you set and the importance that you place on talk and those talk conventions across the school. So we're going to move on to look at some impact now. We won't spend too much time on this. I know Scott has already gone through some of the research with you and you may have heard it before, but it is really important to recognise the impact that we know Oracy can have within a school. So looking at what we know about Oracy, you can see from the infographic on the screen that what we know is that Oracy impacts on everything. It's not only from evidence that we've got nationally and from international research, but also local research we've got from our 50+ Plymouth schools that started with us in the Plymouth Oracy project. We know, you know from the introductory session about the word gap that Scott led. The word gap is within its millions. We know by the time we get to the age of 5, there's already a 19-month language gap. And if things aren't done to address that, that just continues to grow and grow even further through secondary education. And for us, we know many people, including Alex Quigley, state that reading unlocks the curriculum, and it absolutely does. And there's a huge importance of reading across the whole curriculum. But for us, we can see, and hopefully this demonstrates, that Oracy unlocks absolutely everything. The EEF have not only the framework as one of their project studies, but have another number of studies they've done, including work by Robin Alexander and Neil Mercer as well. And what those studies show is that we know it is low cost, but it is a really high impact thing that you can do for your schools. And just before we move on to something specifically within the secondary school setting, I'd just like to draw your attention to that quote in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, which was released by the DFE in 2019. But children with poor vocabulary at age 5 are twice as likely to be unemployed by the time they get to 34. And I just find it astonishing, I think is probably the word, that we're judging or almost maybe setting up what our children can do age 5. So Oracy really is an important skill to get within the whole curriculum. So moving on and being really secondary specific, because I know this is really important to the people looking and listening into this today. This is a really good recommended read for any secondary practitioners. It's a secondary school's journey. They never released the real name of the secondary school within the book, but it's a secondary school's journey to place Oracy and communication skills at the heart of the curriculum. And you can see from the right-hand side of the slide the impact that Oracy has had across the school, well beyond attainment, which is obviously very important. But if we get those other things right, self-esteem and self-confidence, peer interactions, then that naturally supports attainment as well. What I would say, I've read quite a lot of academic books on Oracy, but this one I would say is an easy read. It's actually quite a funny read as well, because it has lots of practical ideas and approaches. But what's really nice is that Mannion and McAllister haven't tried to hide the things that didn't quite go well either as well. They've shared them with you and things that they would do differently next time. So maybe as an Oracy leader in a secondary school, if there's one thing you do resulting from this, is maybe get that book and start to take a look at that and the journey that secondary school took with Oracy development. And finally, just looking at impact before we move on, it's really important, I felt, to share this slide with you, because this is what we had some Plymouth primary school children at an APPG Oracy event, so a government event into the review of Oracy in schools. These children were between 8 and 10 years old, and they stood up, they were really articulate, and this is what they had to say about the power of Oracy and the importance they place on Oracy within their schools. And the reason I'm sharing these with you is because these are the pupils are now transitioning to year 7 in September. So these are the pupils that you're going to be getting in your school, the importance they place on Oracy and the expectations they have of themselves to already be able to talk and to be able to express their views. So I'm not going to read them. I am going to pause in a second to give you a minute to read them before we move on to the next slide. But as you're looking at them, I think to try and convey the sort of power of what these pupils were saying, when I heard them stand up and present them so passionately and eloquently, it did make me a little bit emotional. And you can see Thomas at the top. I will read Thomas's because I think this one is brilliant. But I am proud of myself for speaking out loud. I look back and think, wow, how did I do that? So hopefully if you didn't have a chance to read the last quotes, you can pause the PowerPoint where you are now to read them before we move on to our next slide. Because what is really important for us now, knowing the impact, and I know I've only very briefly unpicked the research with you, or some of the research, but knowing that impact, it's really important to look at the intent. And high quality self-evaluation is a really important place to begin. Thinking about questions such as how do staff interact with pupils in the corridors as well as classrooms? How do pupils interact with each other as well? That's a really important part of this. From walking around your school, you can get a quick overall impression of the importance or not placed on talk and communication within your school. And what we do know, and Ruth has already said, but looking at intent, the implementation process for Oracy is absolutely everything. I don't have a magic wand for Oracy. I wish I did. I'd probably be very rich and could have already retired. But nothing is definite to work. There's no scheme of work I can give you for Oracy that you just pick up and use. But what we do know as part of the Plymouth Oracy project and the 4 years we've been working on it is what has been effective in schools. And this is really deeply rooted in the research that we know is available. So before we look at a self-evaluation documentation that I'd like to recommend to you, Ruth is going to start by talking through some considerations for teaching and learning within your school settings.
Cool. Thank you, Donna. Yeah, great. So we felt that it was really important here just to reflect on Oracy and teaching and learning, curriculum delivery, pedagogy, and just kind of frame it in a way that we really want to encourage you to see Oracy not as a sort of isolated standalone intervention, another strategy, or dare I say it, fad that schools, you know, have a go at, magpie, see some good practice and try and replicate. We really believe that Oracy is a foundational principle that really does enable successful and effective quality first teaching and learning, and it supports the effective delivery of the evidence-informed teaching and learning strategies that no doubt you will have already identified and have in place in your schools as the best way to bring your curriculum to life for the pupils that we serve. And like all of the best teaching and learning strategies, it's not about doing them, it's about how well and how consistently and how explicitly we do them. And the question is, are those teaching learning strategies, is Oracy embedded within your curriculum? Is it a part of your culture? That's our ambition. That's where we want to get to, a place where it's very much just what we do here. You know, that's very much the goal, as is, you know, I'm sure the teaching learning models, approaches, whatever your language is for it, back at your school. We've spoken about implementation. It's always about implementation. So I think it's really important when you're sitting in that explore and prepare phase. And as we know, these are the chunkiest phases in the EF report, and it's where you need to invest most of your time initially before deciding to adopt and implement a programme or an intervention. And it is in this space that you really need to just reflect on where Oracy is currently in your school. Sure, if you decide to work with PTSA in a more sort of bespoke basis, we would absolutely sort of walk that journey with you. But there are things that you can be doing, questions you can be asking yourself and your peers. Is Oracy taught? Is it being modelled? Is it being practiced? Is there a culture of talk? You really need to sort of dig deep on what Oracy already looks like and be really, really honest about it to enable you to define the problem you want to solve, or identify that area of focus that you're going to be working on improving. And for me, Oracy is the how, okay, to making a lot of the evidence-informed teaching and learning approaches really start to have tangible impact. So I'm talking about Rosenshine's principles of instruction. So in that, you know, the importance of modelling, of narrating the thought process, of managing and facilitating really effective deliberate practice, questioning and checking for understanding. The impact and success of those strategies are really, really rooted in high quality talk and the appropriate effective use of language. And that's from a teacher's point of view, but also as a student. So again, I really want you to see this not as something else, another separate intervention, if you will, but potentially an enabler of the pedagogy and teaching learning approaches you already have in place. So how will you review and develop Oracy within each curriculum area? Again, you can't divorce curriculum and pedagogy, and it, just like retrieval practice, just like interleaving and successful sort of space practice, that's only impactful and successful if the teacher has a really, really deep understanding of the key concepts that need to be remembered and retrieved and practiced, if the sequence of learning and how the knowledge learned will need to be later built upon, transferred and applied. That's when retrieval practice becomes really, really effective. It, as everything, as I've already said, it's not that we're just doing it, it's that we're doing it really, really well. So again, I encourage you to sit in this planning phase and think about the place Oracy will have within your curriculum, so that actually it supports and really brings that curriculum to life. It's a fundamental part of it. I speak about the knowledge doing gap quite a lot, and this simply is just the acknowledgement that we know a lot of things. We might agree and understand that things are important. However, that doesn't always translate into action, into a change in our practice. And fundamentally, if we're looking for school improvement and improving outcomes for our students, we need to bridge that gap. And research tells us that the way to bridge the knowledge doing gap is through practice, is through spending time thinking hard about the knowledge and applying it and practicing it. And that, again, that's at any age or stage, right? So that's for us in terms of teacher development, but that's also for our young people when they're learning. Okay, and so again, when it comes to Oracy, we have to make sure that we're not just talking about it, we're actually planning opportunities for students and teachers to practice, to receive feedback, and to practice in a really safe, unthreatening kind of environment. So yeah, that's something that I feel really, really passionately about. And I know that lots of schools are focusing on practice and making sure that both teachers and students have protected time and space for that, because it's so important. And it's so important to develop memory, that practice element, that really thinking hard, and retrieval practice. These are not all silent activities. They don't have to be silent activities. I absolutely understand and hear that there is a place for for silent independent work at times, but you can also plan for really purposeful quality talk, and that can play a real key role in the process that Oliver Lovell, who's the author of Sweller's Cognitive Load Theory in Action book, which I highly recommend, he terms this easing the bottleneck of our working memory, which I think is really a really nice way of putting it. And actually talk and being able to practice saying it is one of those ways that we can help transfer our students' learning from that crowded working memory space into their long-term memory, which absolutely, I'm sure you agree, is the aim of learning. And how can we expect our students to learn, remember, and then write with vocabulary and language that they've never spoken or practiced and had dialogue with? So I think, again, it's really vital that we consider the opportunities that we're giving our students to practice and play around with quality oracy. And then I will leave on probably the most important point. Less is more, and we say that, and I know that's really easy to say, especially in education, when every teacher I meet is driven by a moral imperative to be better, to do it all for their students, because that's why they're teachers, right? Because they know that it's a really, really important job, and they know the quality of teaching is a thing that's going to impact the life chances of the students in their care. But because of that sort of moral imperative, we often throw the kitchen sink at teacher and school improvement. So what I would do is I would really try and encourage you to look for ways to utilise your existing strengths back at school, the existing models of teaching and learning, the people, the networks that you've already got in place and that are proving impactful. You try and utilise those to start thinking about Oracy, and that it's not, again, just that another thing that we add on top of all of the work already going on in schools. And hey, be bold, remove something, take something away if you can. I always, whenever I have a platform to do so, I encourage people to try and get rid of something that isn't delivering on the impact that we want to see on pupil outcomes, pupil well-being. So yeah, and anything that we do is really unlikely to stick or to be valued by teachers if it is presented as another initiative. So I think it's just really important that we consider how we look to share this and implement it across our school. Thanks, Donna.
Brilliant, thanks, Ruth. So I've got a but here, but that but really ties into what Ruth's been talking about, especially the knowledge over the doing gap, because despite what we know and what we've looked at today, many recent studies, and this comes from the work of Robin Alexander and his work within dialogic teaching and the dialogic classroom, these studies show that these features are still the most common in the classroom. And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to ask ourselves why. And you may have, when you read these as I'm talking, you may have your own answers or your own responses as to why we still see this type of classroom interaction where there's limited wait time, or we accept brief answers. We give feedback that says well done, but what well done for? And we don't diagnose or inform what those responses were. There are too many questions from teachers, but few from pupils, all those sorts of things. So for me, and the work I've been doing with schools, and we've been doing with schools across Plymouth, Devon and further afield, it's because Oracy for most isn't easy. And when we adopt these practices, we have to recognise that there is a change of pace. There is more pupil discussion, which may seem uncomfortable for some of the teachers, especially if they've been teaching for quite a long time, or that teachers have got the pressure of content delivery, and they think that slower pace means that they haven't taught the children enough. But actually what they have then taught the children through that discussion means that learning sticks, it is in their memory and they can use it. But if you have the clear expectations and modelling for leadership teams and for the teachers in your schools, you can slowly begin to change this and improve this.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know about you, but those bullet points on the slide at the moment, no doubt that will look familiar to you. I know when I was in the classroom, you know, I can say that I fell into those traps often enough. And no doubt you've actually probably got, you know, identified teaching and learning techniques, strategies, such as, you know, TLACs, cold call, stretch it, wait time. These are all techniques to help us overcome some of these barriers, if you will, to good oracy and good learning in the classroom. And I think, again, just to highlight that oracy is the golden thread that's running through these techniques and the thinking around what quality first teaching and learning looks like. You're probably doing, you know, you probably are already doing elements and things to try and overcome these, but with kind of, again, just shining the light and having the lens of which you're looking at these barriers to overcome, thinking about them with oracy is just going to, we believe, see even more impact later on. So we're going to have a little bit of, we're going to sort of share a way that you can start reflecting and exploring where you currently are in terms of oracy. So again, we'll encourage you to pause and to have a sort of closer look and read at this infographic. And you can kind of look at this from a number of different perspectives. You can look at it from a sort of classroom teacher level. You can look at it as a whole school kind of review framework, if you like, from you as individuals. It'd be really interesting maybe to get pupils' perspective on where they think oracy is at school and where it sits, and you could use this framework potentially to sort of guide some discussions, some focus group, which I think would be really interesting. And like we said, successful good implementation depends on identifying correctly the focus, the area that maybe you want to see improvement in.
Thanks, Ruth. So that infographic actually comes from the recent report of the state of speaking in our schools, the Oracy APPG. If you haven't looked at that report, please take some time to download that, because it is really enlightening as to the movement that Oracy has now got within government, we hope, but actually what teachers on the ground are saying as well. To the left of that infographic, that's something that is a great place, and we're going to focus on now as a start for schools. And these are the Oracy benchmarks from Voice 21. And Voice 21 are a charity, I'm sure most of you know Voice 21, developed from the work that they did from School 21, which is an all-through school in Stratford. But it's really interesting to know, you as Oracy leaders or English leaders, if you've seen these documents, these benchmarks, is it something that you already use? Because this is something that we're really going to recommend as a result of today and listening to us, that you go away and consider for your schools. And the sorts of questions that you'll be asking yourself in schools, and the benchmarks can really help you qualify but also quantify, is what is your main area of development for Oracy in your school? And we know that self-evaluation can be inaccurate sometimes because we don't know what we don't know, or we might have an unconscious bias, or we think this is better than it is, or because we've seen it happening in one class, we think it's happening in every class. So in this explore phase, we need to take a look at this, and the Oracy benchmarks really guide you through a journey of schools nationally and internationally that have really developed Oracy in their schools, so that we don't just fit into a model that we think is already there, or we should use because it's worked in one school, but we build a model that's right for us and right for our school. And within all of the Oracy schools that we work in, I think I say this a bit like a broken record sometimes, but Oracy should look slightly different in each school you go into. Yes, it will have the key principles. Yes, it will have those key aspects, but it's been adapted for the pupils that you've got in your school, and you obviously know your pupils best. So we're just going to take a few slides looking at this document in a little bit more detail, but I don't hope to do in the justice of the 2 or 3 slides that I've got here, the power this document can have in your school. This has been saved to the Padlet that I know John has been building for you as part of this EEF programme, so you'll be able to go down and download it and really take some time to digest it yourself. So if we look in more detail on that next slide, we can see that the document is divided into teacher benchmarks and school benchmarks, which is really useful in itself, because it's, as a teacher, am I doing these things, or can you see these things in my classroom? And as a school, as a leadership team, is this what we see of Oracy across the school? Does our school have an ethos where Oracy really is at the heart of everything we do? And what Voice 21 have been able to do from working with those schools is put together markers for what high quality Oracy could look like. And it, as I've said, it's built from the work that they did from School 21, but also the various other schools they've worked with, including when they supported us at the start of the Plymouth Oracy project in 2017. So let's just take a look at one of those teacher benchmarks in more detail now. And this benchmark is the benchmark 3, which is about teaching Oracy explicitly, linking back to the learning to talk. So each benchmark sets out a key aim, and it gives you as a school an indication of what you should see or should be looking for, or what it could be like. You don't have to take that as gospel. These are just some ideas to get you thinking in your own self-evaluation process as a school of, oh yes, I have seen that in this lesson, or I consistently see this, or I can see that's a feature of good Oracy, but actually I don't think that features in my school at the moment. But there may be, because these are just suggestions or indications, there may be other things you're looking at as well. So for example, within this benchmark, as well as what you've got listed above in those bullet points that you're looking at, you might be looking at whether talk or discussion rules are on display, and are they constantly in use? Are pupils held to account for them? Are teachers held to account for them as well? Is exploratory dialogue, that high quality discussion, planned for? And actually, when you go into the classrooms, regardless of whether it's planned for, is it happening? And are they using those discussion rules to really build on that talk? Questions like, what is the frequency and quality of discussion in the classroom? And do teachers refer back to that Oracy framework, not only in their planning, but in the delivery to pupils? So when the pupils are taking part in a discussion or taking part in a talk activity that's been planned for, do they know that they're practicing this specific aspect of cognitive oracy? Because that's a really important skill moving forwards. Or is today more presentational? So are they looking at some of those physical aspects of oracy, but do the pupils know which aspect of oracy they're looking for and therefore what they need to improve? And as you go through all of the benchmarks, we've only looked at one there in a little bit more depth, but you will get the impression you'll see that all of this needs to be really explicit within oracy teaching. And as an oracy leader, it's really important for you to start to think about now, well, is this what happens in my school, or does it happen slightly different, but it is still quite high? Is it still high quality, or is this something we're lacking and we really need to work on? So what we recommend you do within the summer term, and I know you're really busy with all of your assessments at the moment, but hopefully once those assessments are done and submitted, is to look at the pages of the benchmark and use it as a method of self-evaluation in your school. So this might be something you just do as Oracy leaders, using your own school methods for self-evaluation, learning walks, scrutinies, all those different things that you do. But what we found in some of the schools that we've been working with, when they've taken that a step further, they've really seen where they are with the school and with Oracy, and that has had the most impact for their planning, their improving of their pedagogy and their teaching and learning moving forward, is ask teachers to reflect on these and maybe complete them for themselves, just with quick handwritten bullet points. The best schools have done this anonymously, so teachers don't need to feel that they need to write something positive in every box. They can actually write how they feel it is for in their lessons. And then it does take a bit of time to collate the returns when you get them back to you, but it will help you build a clear picture of your school's strengths. And there will be strengths within Oracy, the areas that you want to develop and build on, and those are the things that will go into your effective implementation plan. Moving away from the Voice 21 benchmarks, we also have an Oracy self-assessment tool that we use at Plymouth Teaching School Alliance, but this is based on the work of Robin Alexander and the Dialogic Classroom. So this is more zoomed in and focused into teacher talk and the quality of teacher talk and what they do within the classroom. Again, this is saved to the Padlet, so if you want to download it and use it with your teachers, then please do. But what we recommend with the teachers that we work with on the Oracy project very early on, so after the very first session or even now, is we ask the teachers to film one of their lessons or part of their lesson and get them to watch it back. They don't need to share it with anybody, it's just them, so they don't need to be nervous about anybody else watching them, which I know we all hate. But when they take the time to step back from their lesson and watch themselves again and really think about these statements, completing the tool on that continuum of what they see, they get a bigger picture of what their teaching is like and how they embed Oracy skills within their classroom. And then you in turn, as an Oracy leader, get a bigger picture of Oracy in your school and your self-evaluation. And what we do know from the teachers who have done it, and most of our teachers do it, is what they see of themselves delivering a lesson can be really quite eye-opening. And they're asking themselves the sorts of questions of how much do pupils talk in a lesson, and what type of talk is that talk as well, what quality of that talk. And really importantly for me as well is, are all the pupils expected to talk, and do all of the pupils talk? I know Dylan William talks about pupils as radiator children. They cuddle up to sort of the comfort of the radiator on the edge of the classroom and expect that other people will do the talking for them. But are there pupils consistently in your school that go from lesson to lesson without talking or contributing something? And that is a change of ethos, and that does take time, because it has to be a school where pupils know it's okay to say something and it's wrong. And we learn from saying things that are wrong, as well as always having to have the perfect answer. But this sort of tool can really start to get your teachers on a journey of thinking about that and building forward what you want to improve within the school. And just before we move on to Rachel and how they've implemented it in their school, because I think that's really important for you to hear, another great activity you can do, we were going to do it if we were doing this live time, so you don't have to do this with us today, but a consensus circle is a really great activity you can do with your staff, either in departmental meeting time, or if you have that opportunity where you have got your staff all together, it's really great to do that then. So I'm just going to talk through what that activity is for those who haven't heard or used Consensus Circle and how it can be so effective. So the question that I'm posing, which I think is a really important question that you pose to the staff in your school as well, is what would a classroom look like if it had Oracy at the heart? Because we need to make sure our vision, our definition of Oracy is the same, and we're all moving from that same starting point on this journey of Oracy together. So for the first minute, you might want to give 2-3 minutes, that's totally up to you. The staff are totally silent, it's their own critical thinking skills, and they start to make a list either on post-its or around the outside of their circle, what they think a classroom looks like if it's got Oracy at the heart. And then once you've done that, we normally set about 5 minutes for everybody in the group to talk with each other, share what you've written, and let other people share what they've written, so that you're building upon each other's points. And it's really important within that group, just like it is with pupils with staff, that everybody shares what they've written and they have that opportunity to talk. And then you can give people 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, however cognitively challenging you want it to be for them. They have to discuss and agree on the top 3 that go in the middle. They have to find the consensus as to those 3 things you would absolutely see in a classroom if it had Oracy at its heart. And then obviously as a staff, you take feedback, you discuss it, you unpick it as a staff to make sure you've got that same vision and you're at the same starting point with your journey. Brilliant activity also to do with the pupils, and for the pupils it really helps them to develop in their confidence, because that first silent bit is they've got a chance to think and just jot a few things down for themselves. When they talk as a group, it really gives them the confidence because they hear other people saying the same thing as them. So they think, yes, I must be right because we've said those similar things. But also they hear other people's viewpoints, or they hear people building on what they've said as well. And then the process really encourages critical thinking, because at the end they need to reach a consensus where they have to justify and reason with whatever question you've put, whatever curriculum topic you've set their consensus circle for. They have to come to that agreement. So whether you use all of the things we've suggested, the benchmarks, our dialogic self-assessment tool, that face-to-face time with staff with a consensus circle, or maybe you just pick key bits out of that, they're all really important starting points for knowing where you are with Oracy and where you want to move on. So now it's over to Rachel. Myself and Ruth get a chance to rest our voices for a moment. Over to Rachel to exemplify the journey that Torbridge have been on since 2017 with Oracy and what they've achieved to date.
Excellent. Thank you, Donna. And hello, everybody. Welcome to this part of the presentation. My name is Rachel Davison, and I'm the Literacy, Oracy and Transitions Leader at Torbridge High. I'm really excited to be a part of the presentation today to be able to share with you our Oracy journey at Torbridge High. So our journey began in November 2017, where we signed up to be part of the Plymouth Oracy project and attended the introductory launch day with the PTSA up at Marjohn's, hosted by Carol Salfordway and Claire Reid. And it was this day that really gave us an insight into the power that Oracy can have in terms of improving outcomes for our students in our school. Up until this point, speaking and listening had been something that we did in our English classes in terms of the GCSE discussion, presentation and role play tasks that also featured within our Key Stage 3 curriculum, and also across the school where students were given some opportunities to present and to have discussions, but it wasn't an explicit part of the curriculum. And also there were quality explicit opportunities of teaching Oracy skills to our students. So it was a fantastic day, and as part of that day, we were asked to go away and to think of a project, a small-based project to be held in school, possibly with a class or a year group, or larger if you were part of a primary school, but to create an Oracy project for within your school, designed on a particular strand of the Oracy framework. Thinking about our whole school focus that we had, or our foci, which was to close the gap for disadvantaged students in terms of those key performance measures, and to improve outcomes for boys, in particular our high prior attainment boys, and to improve the quality of our written work. Thinking about those foci and different approaches and strategies that we had already, interventions that we had already across the school, and we decided that this Oracy project would focus on our Year 8 students, and that we would start the project off with a class. So we used one of my classes. I'm an English teacher, so we had a mixed ability, mixed gender Year 8 class to start the project with, and our journey then began in terms of assessing their Oracy skills. So on the screen, you can see an example of a part of the Oracy assessment matrix. Now, these are a range of criteria, or a checklist, where you can check and assess students' Oracy skills from primary school age up into 16 years. And this was a fantastic starting point. I set up a Oracy task, a discussion learning task, as part of the scheme of learning that we were currently learning in class, and students were recorded, and I sat with the checklist both during the lesson and post, looking at the watching the recording, and was able to assess their Oracy skills. Now, this was really, really surprising. I knew that our students didn't have the most effective Oracy skills. However, I didn't realize quite how low they were. So our lowest Oracy age within the group of 26 students was of an 8-year-old, so matched aged 8. Our highest was age 13, and we had 2 students aged 13 in terms of their Oracy skills according to this matrix. And on average, as a class of 26, the average Oracy age was 10 years old, which was, as I said, really, really surprising. And what this assessment matrix allowed me to do was to identify 2 key areas. Firstly, vocabulary, and secondly, functional language structures, and these were to become the focus of our project. The reason for this is because, obviously, from the matrix, but our students, we felt that when they were involved in talk, they did know the answers, and they had fantastic ideas. However, our students lacked the vocabulary skills and the ability to be able to adapt their language for certain audiences and purposes and functions, to be able to articulate their thinking and their understanding effectively. So those were the focus of our project for Year 1. After that, we did a short student survey with the class, and this was interesting too, because it just highlighted how lacking confidence our students were to be able to speak in class. And when we probed a bit further, students would say that they dreaded, they felt sick, some of them, in terms of being asked questions, even though they were questions that they had an understanding of, an idea of. It was that idea of being picked to answer questions and being maybe judged or ridiculed by their peers that they really dreaded. They felt that they were quite average listeners, and in terms of their speaking skills, in terms of them waiting their turn, working with a partner, working in a group, they scored themselves just above average level 6, which was quite interesting. But again, when we probed that further, it was more that our students felt that if they talked, they were communicating effectively, they were using Oracy skills if they were able to simply just communicate with others. So their perception was that they were okay, they were average speakers, but simply based on just whether they talked or not. So in terms of our Year 1 project, one of the absolute most important things that we did in terms of securing success for our project was, at the very start, I established a Oracy Champions group. Now, this involved myself, and as I said, I teach English, but then also another key member of staff from every curriculum area, including English. We had another member of staff from English too. So that every department was represented within the Oracy group, and they were the staff who drove the Oracy forward across the curriculum. So these were members of staff who I knew were looking for development opportunities and who were up for the challenge, who are also good communicators. So we had a launch. They were invited to a lunch. We discussed the Oracy project so far and what I had started off with the Year 8 group, and basically discussed what we wanted to achieve or what we could achieve as a group across the school. And the Oracy Challenge, what was great as well, with all those key members of staff, it was made a part of our meeting cycle within school, so that we had time together every couple of weeks after school on a Monday to meet and just share what we had been doing, to share what had worked well, what hadn't worked well, and to bounce ideas around with each other in terms of what had been going on in our departments in terms of Oracy. So what we also looked at as well were these key characteristics of students who lack proficient Oracy skills. So thinking about, our focus was on Year 8, we looked at these Oracy skills, and we weren't surprised with how many of these applied to our students, especially in terms of the students who struggle to make eye contact, who cannot find the words when they're trying to articulate their answers, jumbling up ideas as well, and not being able to structure narratives for simple things such as what did you do at the weekend in tutorial. So students not being able to structure that in terms of on Friday night I did this, on Saturday my family and I did this, and so on. And also not responding to answers or just simply saying, don't know, these skills, these lacking proficient Oracy skills are definitely applied to our students. But once we did that, and so that the Oracy champions were really clear about where some of the struggles that our students have, we also had a time reflecting on our own teaching within our own classrooms. And we used this tool from Voice 21, the dialogic do's and don'ts. So staff, the Oracy champions filled this out. Some of them just did it from their own reflections. Others decided to record themselves. I did that myself as well, and watch it back and just shade in where we were in terms of our dialogic teaching and learning for Oracy, which was really interesting. So I definitely recommend that too, just in terms of self-reflection. Next, when we came together, so based on moving on from our own classrooms, we thought about a whole school, and we used this developing Oracy tool that has the 4 strands of the Oracy framework, and we rag rated where we felt we were as a school in terms of providing opportunities for students to develop their physical, linguistic, cognitive and physical Oracy skills. That was really useful. I definitely recommend that, and we'll put that on the Padlet for you so that you too can do that for your school. So once we've had those reflections and those rag ratings, this was a copy of the mind map that we created. Firstly, we thought about, right, what's our Oracy goal, our vision? What did we want Oracy to look like beyond the Year 8 project and the years in front after that? We then thought about, right, how will we know we've achieved it? So there you can see on the screen the different ideas that we had of what that would look like, what success would look like in terms of achieving our goal, and then think about how we would achieve it. So we had the Oracy champions in every curriculum area, but we wanted to be thinking about those banks of resources that we could share with staff, the sharing of experiences, the thoughtful, careful planning across the curriculum, where students won't have explicit opportunities in every curriculum area to develop their Oracy skills throughout the academic year in terms of all 4 strands, and so on. So if you'd like to pause the video there or here to have a little look, please do so. And I should just say, following on from that vision, we then put together our implementation plan. So as we had our Year 8 launch, so we were, at this time, I was running the project with my Year 8 class, and they were fully aware of that. It was made explicit to them that they had been chosen especially to be a part of the Plymouth Oracy project, and that they were my focus group. With the Oracy champions from across the curriculum, we decided that was a great opportunity to not wait actually for the next year. That was part of year one. We would, within our own classrooms, be developing Oracy opportunities for our year 8 classes. How do we do it? Basically, we began by simply creating opportunities for talk. You can see I put talk, and more talk. Lots and lots of different fun activities to begin with, in terms of not necessarily attached to the specific scheme of learning. So we've got Professor Know-It-All, which is the odd one out. These were planned opportunities just to get the students talking in lessons with structures to help them, to guide them through that, so that we had an opportunity to show them what Oracy was, to give them lots of praise for where they were developing their Oracy, and then in terms of, we knew that we would develop that later on once they were comfortable talking. We launched the project to the whole of year 8 for assembly. We ran Oracy challenges. We communicated with home so that parents were aware exactly of what we were doing in class and in our lessons. We also had the Talk for Learning guide. So our students, our year 8s, we tasked them with the challenge of putting together, of creating their own rules for Oracy and for talk within classes. Now, the Voice 21 have these available on their website, their own protocols or their own guidelines, if you wish to use them. We wanted to create our own. So we actually set a challenge and students came up with the rules, which I'll show you in a moment. And we also created the functional language booklet, which is on the next few slides. So here is the Talk for Learning guide, or the TFL, that our students put together. These were the rules that they wanted as part of using Oracy within their class, within their lessons, within classrooms. Based on this, we put together the poster, we had it made, and we had it in each of the Oracy champions classrooms where those students were taking notes or using Oracy. They're fantastic because with that display, it was really easy to remind students that if they weren't, for example, actively listening, just to simply point or just to remind that, remember, these are the rules that you came up with as a year group. Let's make sure we're following them. And along with this, we also came up with protocols so that, for example, if our students do this, it means that they want to share an idea or that they want to build on somebody else's response. Rather than having a hands up, you may wish to do a thumbs up. It's entirely up to you. Our students like this. And here is an example, or just a page from our functional language guide. So as I said before, one of our focus, as well as the vocabulary, was this functional language guide. And we found that students needed support in guiding their talk, whether they were evaluating, predicting, reasoning, agreeing, and so on. I'm thinking about just from that year 8 focus group, how we had Oracy age from 8 all the way to 13. We wanted to create a resource that students could use that would be applicable to all students, no matter where they were in terms of their current Oracy skills. So you can see on the screen there we had the good, even better, and best in terms of those talking frames. And what was great about this booklet, every student was given a copy of it. We had classroom a group of 30 for each classroom as well, where the Oracy champions were teaching, and staff would use these on their PowerPoints to when using Oracy, so that they were displayed and students could use them for their talk. And what we found is actually students were using them for their writing too. So they'd ask to use their booklets if we didn't remind them to do it in the first place, to have those booklets out on the desks in front of them and to use them for their written work. So straight away we could see the impact that Oracy was having on their writing too. So time quickly passed and we got to the end of year 1, and the impact is here on the screen for you. So our year 8 focus group, their confidence massively increased, and I'm really pleased to announce that our Oracy assessment matrix demonstrated. We did it again at the end of the project, at the end of the academic year, and we saw that on average the Oracy skills increased from 10 years at the start to 13, which was absolutely fantastic. And we had more students then moving out of that lower end of the age 8, more students shifting towards the higher age, and many more students then obviously having that higher Oracy age in terms of those 15 to 16 years old. We had an increase in student participation in lessons, their engagement. We found that they were participating more rather than complying in terms of just answering questions in a simple form. They were wanting to answer, they were wanting to get involved in class discussion. And actually the quality of students' answers was much better. They were extended and using much higher quality vocabulary in their answers too. As part of that, we also had a successful debate club. We formed our own debate tutor group too, who debated as part of the Pixel competition and made it to the final, which we were really, really proud of. We found that the quality of collaborative talk as well, so peer-on-peer talk, paired, triad and group students were performing much better in terms of the quality of their talk too. I've mentioned already that the quality of the written work improved, so especially around vocabulary, but also the structure of students' answers and the explanation of detail was fantastic, and that's something that our students really do struggle with, so that was great. We also in the July did a whole school launch of Oracy, our staff only day, which was fantastic to give staff an insight into what was coming in the next academic year, but also just to build up that awareness of what Oracy is and the impact that the project had so far in the first year. And as part of a whole range of different interventions that we were running at Torbridge High, we saw that our results did improve, and we felt that the Oracy project had been a part of that in terms of the year 8s and looking at their attainment at the end of that academic year in our teacher reviews. So moving on to year 2, as I said, we wanted whole school implementation, and really timely actually, we had these articles that had come out at around the same time, which really resonated with us, that idea that hundreds of 5-year-olds in Plymouth had fallen behind in their speaking skills, with boys in particular struggling to express themselves and to connect their ideas. And that mirrored exactly what we had found at the very start of the Plymouth Oracy project in terms of our assessment of our students' speaking and Oracy skills. It was exactly the same, being able to express themselves and connecting their ideas. So this was shared with staff, and we had a whole school staff CPD session, and during that, at the start of it, we shared the profile of our upcoming year 7s. We had decided, based on the transitions information, as you can see there, we had year 7s coming in with an average reading age of 10 years and 8 months, but the reading age went from aged 6 and 2 months to 16 years and 6 months, with only 7 pupils having a reading age of 14 plus, which was 3%, despite on records from our teacher assessments from the SATs information, having 35% more able students. The results just didn't tally up. And when we assessed students when they joined us at Torbridge High, we found that vocabulary was or that explicit vocabulary knowledge was a barrier to our students in terms of their learning. And so we felt that we wanted to use the Oracy project and the foundations that we built from year 1 to develop and have this as our focus for the second year in terms of our whole school implementation. And it links in brilliantly with what we have looked at so far in terms of this disciplinary literacy course, that literacy and vocabulary are not bolt-on to subjects, that teaching science or history or geography or whatever subject is the teaching of the language of that subject. And so that really formed the basis of what we were doing in terms of our whole school implementation. But as I said, we shared our whole school vision. The Oracy champions and myself were part of the team who launched Oracy to the whole school body. We were all responsible for the different parts of the CPD in terms of sharing with staff what Oracy was, how we were going to approach Oracy at our school. We had the termly focus as well, so that each term had an explicit Oracy focus for our students. we had a whole school student launch as well. Because of the success of the first year, we mirrored that in year 2. So again, we ran assemblies for each year group. We shared our expectations and our non-negotiables for our students, homeschool communication, and also we decided that we wanted to have Oracy as not just in lessons, but as part of our tutorial sessions. So each week, students had a tutorial session that was based on developing their Oracy. This meant in year 2 that we had explicit Oracy teaching across the curriculum. So when we had been part of the project in the first year, we found that when we looked at teaching at the very start of the project, that most of the talk within the classrooms was social talk. The teacher was facilitating students basically just sharing their ideas, and the talk between the teacher and students was facilitating those answers. We wanted to move that to be more accountable dialogic talk, so we planned those opportunities for our subject areas too. In terms of learning walks, literacy and Oracy featured as part of that. So staff were given in their curriculum areas feedback regarding what went well and areas of development for in terms of Oracy provision within their lessons. We have a Torbridge High Spark Meet at our school. So each month, staff share little nuggets of strategies and things that have worked well within their classes. We had each month an Oracy slot in terms of the Spark Meet. We also made sure that students were receiving lots of praise, explicit praise regarding anything that they did in terms of Oracy. So it might have been, for example, right, when you answered that question, you had fantastic eye contact, well done, that's an achievement point. Or you spoke really clearly and great volume, excellent achievement point. And again, that helped to build students' confidence and enjoyment of Oracy within their lessons. And throughout that year, we had continued whole school explicit vocabulary instruction CPD, so that staff were drip fed lots of different strategies and approaches that we could use to developing vocabulary through Oracy. So here is our approach that we had in terms of our non-negotiables. If you'd like to pause the video here and have a little look through, I won't read them to you. Come back when you're done. Okay, the next part of this PowerPoint are generally just simply resources that we use, that we developed in our year 2 of the project that you may wish to use. We can make them available on Padlet for you, should you wish to download them and use them yourselves or adapt them. If you have any questions regarding them, my email was at the start of the presentation, so please do email me. So on your screen now are Oracy speaking frames. We took the booklet of the functional talk and also made Oracy talk structure posters to make it a bit easier for students in terms of accessing that on one page whilst they were talking. Some departments chose to adapt these specifically to their areas as well, which was really effective in terms of disciplinary literacy and talking like a historian or talking like a scientist and so on. On the screen now are talk roles. So this is something that we had already in place for reading at our school. As part of our literacy intervention, students have reciprocal reading roles, which have worked fantastically at developing their reading skills. And actually, Voice 21 had this equivalent for Oracy. These are brilliant because it means that when you are setting up group work in terms of discussion, that if the students have specific roles that they need to fulfill with the sentence structures there or the Oracy structures to help them to do that, it means that they are much more focused, and it means that they were focused on the task in terms of not doing it for a couple of minutes and then reverting back to conversations about the night before or what they were doing at the weekend, but quality talk where everybody has a part to play within the success of that group work. And something we love at our school is these 9 talk moves. So these don't have to be done in any order. You can use one of them, 2 of them. It's entirely up to you within your classrooms. They're basically simple strategies that you can use to help support talk in lessons. So yeah, that will be available for you. Something else that worked really well and as part of our developing Oracy within our second year is having students peer and self-assess their Oracy skills. So these were either recording Oracy lessons, and then students watching them back and reflecting on themselves or their peers in terms of what skills were they really effective at during that Oracy opportunity, or which ones do they need to develop. Other ways that we did it is we had students in the middle completing their Oracy task, and then the students watching around and completing the Oracy assessment, self-assessment tool or peer assessment tool. And it just meant that students get then some clear feedback in terms of were they audible? Did they speak at a good pace? Did they speak confidently? We also adapted it. Did they make eye contact? So this is a resource that's easily adaptable to allow you or the students to self and peer assess their Oracy skills. I love this idea. So one of our colleagues across the school who's really keen, she was really struggling within her lessons in terms of students building on others' ideas. And so she brought in a big box of Lego. And the way that she did, she set up the discussion activity. And then students, rather than having just within their group discussions, rather than each person just randomly sharing their idea, they built on each other. They physically used Lego pieces, and as they built on each other's ideas, so connected ideas, they would then add their colour of Lego to the structure. They could physically see that building up of the ideas and that development, which worked very, very well. I've also seen within our school, and I know other schools use this too, I know that primary schools use it as part of the Oracy project, a piece of string. So within a group, students have a piece of string, and then each time somebody shares their ideas or builds on or challenges others, they get the string passed to them, and they can then see how many times they've spoken and how many times they've built on those ideas, which is just a great fun way of making sure that everybody gets involved, and nice and simple and nice and cheap and cost effective too. And obviously, I'm sure, like you, our school, we've done lots of work on teacher questioning and moving away from the ping pong, the tennis rally robin, so to speak, in terms of question, answer, in terms of we wanted staff to develop questioning in terms of posing the question, pausing, and giving students that thinking time, and then pouncing. And then, as well as that, bouncing it on. So we also call that the basketball effect at our school. You may call it something different. But using this teacher-led questioning style to ensure that students are building effectively on others' ideas, and that development of ideas through Oracy, so that students consolidate their thinking and can then take that learning where they've consolidated and move it towards when they're doing their writing, basically, developing their understanding. And we have explicit vocabulary teaching, as I said. So we did start off with this. So you can see this 7 steps to explicit vocabulary teaching. And you can see an example completed here in terms of teaching students the Tier 2 vocabulary. And actually, in hindsight, based after the year 2, this was too complex. It was too time consuming. Even if you were only teaching the class 1 or 2 words per lesson, it took too much time, even when they were in favour of this process. So we have now actually adapted it. We use the Freya model, the 4-square vocab model, which is much more effective. But you may wish to use this at your school. And in year 2, I remember we, as part of one of our CPD trainings, was simply to give them the words, give the students the words. And for too long, we have spent within teaching, getting students not to basically have those words, to think of them, right, we'll think of them together, what could we use? Actually, just give them the words. And if we give them the words, then as they learn them, they will then take on those vocabulary choices and use them more naturally within their work, within their learning. So in terms of our writing approaches, now when students are writing extended answers, we'll use a resource that looks like this, where we have the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 vocabulary down the sides. It just means that students have it there to hand in front of them. They can use it as a checklist if they wish to. Highlight it or tick it off when they've used it, but it's there as a reminder. And we've done the same with reading. So to ensure that our students are challenged in terms of high quality reading materials, but also that they have the synonyms or the definitions for those tier 2 words. And obviously not all of them, but the ones that are a really important part of that lesson. We have it on the resource, so it's there with students as they read that text. And here you can see another example, and this one's from Humanities department, where students are given the teacher model, but also that list there, that tier 2 vocabulary that the teacher wants the students to use. And here, so that's worked very well, and there's a colleague from our history department, from Humanities, who really pushed the vocabulary ladders across the Humanities department, and we use them whole school now. But giving students the vocabulary ladders and encouraging them to use them in their writing, you can see there those ticks where students have then taken that language and applied it to their work, which is fantastic. Also, the same colleague created this in the Humanities as well, along with students, in collaboration with students. So our students and staff members created this in Humanities, where the banned words. And what's great is that our students will now, if another student or a teacher accidentally uses this language, they'll get picked up on it. This, you said bad, that's terrible. What could you use instead? And they'll challenge each other. So this is a fantastic display that's used a lot in the Humanities department. And then we have the summary bullseye, where students get points for using different levels of vocabulary within their answers. And that's really easily adaptable. You can see it there on the right from Blood Brothers, but also an example from geography as well. Really easy to adapt for your lessons and your subject areas. So in terms of year 2, what was the impact? We had explicit Oracy teaching for all students across the whole school, including sixth form. There was explicit teaching of tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary lessons across the curriculum, and that was evident from our learning walks, from our book looks, and from those conversations with curriculum leaders and staff members too. We felt that as a school that there's greater depth of thinking and elaboration of answers, both orally and written, in our student responses. And again, we had that even further improved quality of collaborative talk activities, and therefore improved learning. Students were much more focused during Oracy tasks, which then positively impacted on their learning. Again, we had that improved quality of the written work, especially vocabulary. We could, of course, with such a big focus on vocabulary, we would have been shocked if there wasn't an improvement. But we found that students, the quality of their written work in terms of their achievement, their attainment, definitely improved as a result of our work done in this area. And again, that linked then to further improvement of results. And you can see on the screen there just some comments from the students in terms of their feedback from our student leadership and our student voice. In terms of that there, I used to hate talking and sharing my ideas, but now I like it because everyone has to do it. So although we've got that everyone has to do it, it's the idea that everyone is talking in lessons and that you're not being singled out. And again, at the bottom there, that not feeling as scared anymore and feeling really clever when they're using that language, which then encourages the students to want to use it and to feel challenged and proud when they do. And then on the screen are there's some more comments from staff, students, and what parents have said too. So if you'd like to pause the video here just to read through those, please do so. And then lastly, moving on to year 3 and where we are now, actually, we moved from that whole school to that development to embedding Oracy. We were unfortunately in our third year hit with COVID and our school lockdowns, which has obviously had a massive impact. We've found on our students' confidence skills as they've returned to school. We have identified that students have been, and I'm sure that you found this in your schools too, that students have been less willing and less confident to completely immerse themselves back into those talking environments within lessons, and being more nervous about sharing, more reluctant to share their ideas. that has improved. Now that students are getting back into the swing of things, of being back in lessons and being back at school, we are seeing again a rise in their confidence levels. But that has taken, obviously, from the end of lockdown until now to be able to start to see those improvements. And it's not been as rapid as we would have liked, but we are seeing them. So Oracy champions leading Oracy projects across the departments is something that we're doing to embed Oracy across our school. And we've got cross-curricular colleagues as well, teaming up and running projects, sort of like lesson study projects, where they plan opportunities for students together and then carry them out and watch each other do that and have the feedback. So that's working very, very well at our school, so I'd recommend that. There's lots more increased opportunities for talk, both inside and outside the classroom, and with external audiences. So far, up until recently, those have been virtually, but we're looking at now for opportunities to have external audiences come in after the middle of June, where students will then have the opportunity to talk in front of different external people. And as I said, explicit Oracy teaching and learning opportunities mapped across the curriculum. So as part of our curriculum plan, our curriculum model, across all subjects, students now have planned opportunities alongside reading and writing to develop and extend their Oracy skills. We've done further we have further CPD on questioning to further develop students as curious learners, and a continued focus on vocabulary instruction. That's not going away, as we know from our disciplinary literacy leadership course that we are doing now. A big focus on that. And so we will continue with that challenge at Torbridge High. And at our school as well, we are following Rosenshine's principles of teaching, and Oracy just plays a massive part in that. Now we're on our journey with the Rosenshine's principles of teaching, where staff are fully using those lesson structures and those principles within the lessons. We've now found that where we're doing that, that Oracy features just plays a massive role in terms of that teacher instruction, creating that subject mastery for our students, and especially making it stick too. So providing those opportunities, those structured talk opportunities for students to fully process and consolidate what they're learning through the Oracy. And then again, that adaptive teaching, so using the talk structures, using the sentence stems, the different ways that in which we can support students with different learning needs, and adapting our teaching through Oracy to support them with that. So we're very much so still developing our Oracy in terms of embedding it at Torbridge High and through those elements there. And that's where our next CPD for staff is. We've got one coming up soon where staff will be looking at Oracy in terms of those principles of teaching. So we're by no means done at Torbridge High. We're still very much on that Oracy journey, but I hope that you found the information in this part of the presentation useful. As I said, my email address is on there, so if you've got any questions, please do email me, and we'll put these resources available on the Padlet for you too. So thank you, everyone. I'm now going to pass you back to Donna and Ruth, who will continue the final part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for talking us through your journey. So now we're just going to, for the last few slides, and there isn't much left for us to discuss, but for you to think, what do you need moving forwards as an Oracy leader, but then what do you need as a school moving forwards as well? And you might have some immediate ideas, but you won't fully know this until you conduct your own self-evaluation of Oracy and consider the journey that Rachel shared with you, that Torbridge have been on as well, and just mull it over a little bit. But what we'd just like to share with you before we leave you today is that as PTSA, we are here to support you, either as individual schools or as group of schools like you are here today. But what we want to do, and what we've done with the schools we've worked with so far, is to build a bespoke offer for you as Plymouth secondary schools. So therefore, we do need to understand your needs and what you're looking for moving forwards. And just to guide you in your thoughts a little bit around that is thinking about our current professional development model and what we offer to schools who currently work with us. So there are 3 stages in what we currently do, and we break that down really explicitly on purpose to make sure we get those great foundational blocks in place for Oracy before we move on to those higher order skills. But we start by getting our students talking and thinking about the research, but also those organisational factors, things that we know in working schools, to get our pupils participating, engaged, thinking about the environment and the ethos that we set, and how we practically organise Oracy within the school using those evidence, the evidence we have from informed models of teaching and learning. And then as we move forward on the journey, we always have a bit of time in between our sessions or in between our professional development, so that you can go away, have a go, unpick some things, come back to us with successes, but also come back and say, I tried this and it didn't quite work. So you're building a learning community amongst yourselves as well, and support that you have that isn't just us as Plymouth Teaching School Alliance. But then we move on to developing the quality of talk. So thinking about how we now make that talk more purposeful, how we scaffold it, and how we use language functions and vocabulary really explicitly to improve what our pupils are saying. And that naturally builds on some of the things that Ruth has been talking about today, but we really look in more depth around the metacognition of Oracy, retrieval, and just how pupils can reflect and start to appraise their own quality of talk to make those improvements. And then finally, what we do with teachers as we move along the academic year or the journey is think about how we can deepen and embed the quality of interaction within our classrooms. And that's where we really turn the dial from focusing on pupil talk and getting our pupils to talk more and that quality into teachers and the quality of teacher talk, looking at that dialogic classroom and what that dialogic classroom looks like, and then building peer dialogue development within that, as well as the quality of teacher talk.
Okay. Right, well, thank you, Donna. And we're going to end really just on a little plea from us. It's a really simple, short document that we've just put together on a form, on a Microsoft Forms. And if you would be so kind to complete this and return it to us, it will be so helpful to support the work of Tony and Krista in terms of identifying what that potential Plymouth secondary Oracy programme could look like. And I just want to give a shout out to Tony, because both Donna and I know how hard he is working to try and secure some funding that would enable a bespoke secondary Oracy programme to come to you guys. So we're obviously here ready and waiting to make that a reality, and so we really hope that we will be working with you some more in the future. We had originally asked for the 5th of July only because obviously we were going live on the 15th of May, but you may not have even seen this by that date now, so we would just ask that it gets returned as soon as possible before the end of the summer term would be brilliant, and that will just enable us, like Donna's said, to ensure that the offer coming to you would be completely bespoke and of real value to you and your schools. So we'll make sure that that link comes to you in the email as well, but obviously you may just prefer to pause the presentation now and scan that code and get that filled in and returned. So thank you in advance for you guys completing that. And finally, just to say a huge thank you for your time. I really know how precious that is, and I hope that this little whistle stop tour of what Oracy can be to a teacher, to a pupil, and to a school, and how what the implications can be for getting this stuff right in our schools. We're really passionate about it. and we've just seen some amazing impact when Oracy is implemented effectively in schools. So if you would like to find out more, if you want to discuss anything that we've covered, or you just want to sort of give us some feedback or ask some more questions, that's how to get hold of us. So our emails are on the slides, and you can always visit the PTSA website or the socials. So we're on Twitter and we're on Facebook, so you can reach out in those platforms too. And yeah, and just want to say thank you, and we really hope to continue to work with you in the future. So that's a bye from me.
And bye from me.